gives us a history.
This call is now being recorded.
So he gives us history. So when the history is taken, we have to present it in the form of a storytelling. So what do you mean by storytelling is, patient was apparently normal Saturday night or whatever, 2 days, 3 days back night. Patient went to the bed. Patient, when he woke up in the morning, patient went to the bathroom, or when the patient attempted to go to the bathroom, they found difficulty in using. Now this is one scenario. Another scenario, patient may say, then following which patient was found unconscious, and the patient may have had loss of consciousness, for which the patient was brought to the hospital, taken to nearby private hospital. By the time patient recovered consciousness, but found that there is difficulty in using in left or right side. After that, the patient was brought to then after that they referred the patient to our hospital, who came at around 10 a.m. or in the morning or in the afternoon. Patient came. Then, then, so now you have come up to the present. That is, patient has brought to the hospital. But when you are presenting, the patient has been there for 3 days. So then further what happened? Is the patient improving? Is the patient condition static, or is the patient deteriorating? So that is how you are going to tell the presenting history of presenting illness. You have to tell it in this way, in this format. That is, it should be so it should be a good flow of events. What happened first, then what happened next, then what happened subsequently after admission, and at present, that is today. That is, we are seeing the patient after 5 days. Is the patient condition improving, patient static, or patient deteriorating? Because all that has relevance to your analyzing the etiology. Now, I'll give you 3 case scenarios, and you have to tell me what can be the possibilities. Now, the first possibility is, as I told you, typically patient went to the bed, got up early in the morning, was trying to go to the bathroom, and realized that there is a difficulty in using the right upper and lower limb. Then patient, after some time, noticed that patient is having difficulty in speech. Now, if such a history is there, what is the possibility? What event could have occurred to happen? Is there no ischemic event, or in ischemic event it can be thrombotic or embolic, or it can be hemorrhagic. So these are the 3 possible events which can occur, which were the devastating, the end effect of difficulty or inability of using one side. Now, with such a history, what is the possibility?
Ma'am, ischemic stroke probably.
Yeah, ischemic stroke. In ischemic stroke, what is more probable with this typical history? Is it a thrombotic or an
A
embolic?
thrombotic one. A thrombotic
Yes.
stroke.
Thrombotic. Now, typically, thrombotic stroke will present like this. The patient went for a rest, went to they took a rest. When got up, the patient, usually early morning. This is the typical history. Now, there is another scenario I'll give. A 40-year-old male who went to the work. Usually work he went to a garden or whatever fields to work. Then what happens is the nearby attendants note that the patient had an episode of seizures. So what they'll do, they rush to the nearby GH or nearby private whatever clinics, and then the patient was subsequently referred to our hospital. By the time the patient came to our hospital, patient recovered. Patient had difficulty in using right upper and lower limb. Now, if such a history is there, what is the possibility?
Embolic stroke.
So this gives a typical history of an embolic stroke. In embolic stroke, usually it is during activity. It is not, peak. I mean, when the patient is working, it is not during sleep and all. It can occur anytime. But the most, like what we say, the most probable thing is usually when in the activity, because of some dislodgement of the clot, which will go as an emboli and shower and cause a about a 50-year-old male who is a smoker, alcoholic, who is a diabetic, hypertensive, who was obese and all that. So patient was, so patient is working. Patient suddenly develops severe headache and vomiting and loses consciousness. So by the time they brought to hospital, patient is in a very bad shape. When you see the BP, it is 220, 110. Now what scenario you are
He-
expecting?
Hemorrhagic.
Hemorrhage. Yeah, so this is your typical presentation for your thrombotic, embolic, and hemorrhagic. Now, if you see this, only if you get this sequence of event, what happened, then what happened next, then what happened next, we will not be able to analyze what is the etiology. That is why, see, when you are presenting, the presentation should be in a flow. What happened first, what happened next, and then what happened next. And then, suppose the patient is improving, whatever thing. So which group of patient improve, which group of patient may be static, and which group of patient may deteriorate from these three events.
Embolic stroke patients may improve, ma'am,
Very
and
good.
hemorrhagic stroke patients may worsen, and
Worsen, very good.
thrombotic may either remain static or possibly worsen, ma'am. Not sure.
Possibly worsen, or it can also improve. So there are three possibilities, but usually it is the hemorrhagic which has a very bad course and it may even deteriorate. But it's not that all 100% all the hemorrhagic strokes are going to present like that. But 90% of them will have a very bad course and usually deteriorate rapidly. Or if it is a massive infarct, that is a full middle cerebral artery territory is involved, it's a massive infarct, so then the patient may deteriorate further. They may, or may, suppose patient presents on the first day, patient is conscious and except for the weakness. After 2 days, instead of improving, patient suddenly becomes goes for contact sensory. Patient loses consciousness and the weakness is worsening. Then it may be a hemorrhage on top of an ischemia. So anything can happen. So unless we get the sequence of event, we may not be able to tell. Now, see, now this is not the end of the story in the sense that you will have to ask all the relevant. Was there any history of severe headache? Was there any episode of seizures? Was there history of loss of consciousness at the onset? What I'm telling is, at the onset was these features there to differentiate whether it is a thrombotic, embolic, or a hemorrhagic. So all these three will be there. So this is how you're going to, when you're going to say history of presenting illness, first you will put this flow of event in a very very nice manner, so that um, the other person who is listening to your presentation should be able to get a picture of what happened, so that we can know what may be the possible etiology. Now, once we have finished with that, we will go to first we'll, so like in presentation, history taking also, we'll go in a perfect order, in the sense first we'll ask all about the motor weakness, then we'll ask about the cranial nerves, then we are going to ask about the sensory, then we are going to ask about the autonomic, and then in the after autonomic we are going to ask about the etiological history. So this, as we do in a present examination, even in history, we are going to go in this order, because if we go in this order, we are not going to miss any history. So they may have thought that it is not relevant, so they will not tell you unless we ask some leading questions. They may not be able to give us that history. So we go in a chronology. We go in this order. So first we have finished about the what happened was apparently normal, then what next. Now once we, then on onset, was there any seizure, headache, was there any loss of consciousness, all that we are going to ask. After that we will go to motor. In motor we are going to ask history of weaknesses of both upper and lower limb. Now, when we are going to ask about the history of the motor weakness, so what we have to do is, we have to ask history first about the proximal weakness, then the distal weakness. So in upper limb, proximal weakness, how are we going to ask? What history we will ask?
Difficulty in getting up from bed, ma'am.
That is about for lower limb, no? Upper limb
Lifting
proximal.
the hair, arm above the head, ma'am, combing hair.
Yeah, so the history. So as we always tell in history, we have to ask in the form which they can understand. We cannot ask do you have any proximal weakness? We are not going to know. So how are we going to ask whether the patient is able to comb their hair? Patient is able to reach for the object above that is above his height, no? Whether he is able to reach for the object. So these will give you a clue about the proximal weakness. For distal weakness, what are we going to ask?
But doing fine activities like writing, buttoning shirt.
So the fine activities like mixing of food, buttoning shirt, all that will be your fine activity. That is you're going to rule out distal weakness. That is about the upper limb. Then for the lower limb, as the person rightly said, whether able to get up from the bed or whatever. Then what are the other things you can ask? Lower limb.
Buckling of knees.
Holding slippers, ma'am.
That is about the distal. So proximal is whether you're able to getting up, as you said, from the bed, getting up from the sitting posture, then
Buckling of knees, ma'am.
buckling of knee. So whether see how will you ask whether they're able to climb down the stairs, climb up the stairs. Then about the distal, you're going to ask whether they're able to put the slippers or not able to. So that is about the distal weakness of lower limb. Then for trunk muscles, what are you going to ask? Turn on the bed side to side. Okay, so that completes all your motor weaknesses. Now why are we asking all such questions? Now venous cerebrovascular accident or stroke, which is the tract which is involved?
Spinal.
Corticospine.
So it is the corticospinal tract or the pyramidal tract. Now so what is homunculus?
It's a visual representation of all the areas, visual representation of all the areas of the body on the cortex, ma'am.
Motor area, no, a motor area of the cortex. Now, the visual representation, if you had seen, in the physiology book they have described, it is not so symmetrical as what we are, no. Few
Yes.
portions will be like enlarged and few portions are small. So, what are the enlarged portions? What do you see?
Face, the hand.
Face, the hand, the tongue, the thumb, yeah. So
Yes.
so these are parts which are represented more than the other parts. So in other words, what is in the pyramidal tract? What is the function of pyramidal tract?
It supplies all the spinal nerves, ma'am. I mean, they are the upper motor neurons, ma'am.
Very good, upper motor neurons. At the end of the day, what is the function of your pyramidal tract? You have an extrapyramidal system and a pyramidal system, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So now extrapyramidal system will take care of all your balance and all the other activities. What is the function of cerebellum?
Balance, ma'am.
Balance,
And
coordination, more of coordination. That is about your
coordination.
cerebellum.
Yes, ma'am.
Pyramidal tract is for your fine movements. That is what is important for writing. That is what is important for your buttoning. That is what is important for your all the fine activities is your pyramidal tract. It fine tunes. The final fine tuning which occurs is this pyramidal tract. The other basic activities is taken care of by your extrapyramidal system. So now, basically what happens is when the pyramidal tract is involved, you will have more of distal weakness than proximal weakness. Of course, when there is a spinal shock, when everything is gone, you can have power of 0/5. But if you are nowadays, we do thrombolysis. We are, that golden hour. We are doing thrombolysis. We try to save so as many neurons as possible, so patient recovers well. Now, when the patient recovers well, so even when during recovery, usually the proximal activity starts. In fact, the distal weakness is the last to disappear. Now, if you see a patient typically who comes on day one, even in our setup, even in government hospitals, we are doing thrombolysis if the patient comes in the golden hour. So you can see a dramatic improvement in 2 to 3 days or maximum by 3 months, they recover all their functions. But still, if you probe in, they'll say, I'm able to walk, I'm able to do everything, but still my writing is not clear. Of course, It's a right hand, and I'm still have difficulty in buttoning, still have some spillage, still something. No? So this fine movement, so that is what is most important. So the distal weakness occurs more in the pyramidal tract involvement rather than proximal. Suppose now say CNS is not only stroke, what I keep telling all of you, CNS is a big, vast topic. But since stroke is exam case for you, we discuss in detail about the stroke. Now suppose a patient comes with proximal weakness. What are the possibilities?
Guillain-Barre syndrome, ma'am.
So rather we put it as it can be some low motor neuron type of lesions. Guillain-Barre is different. Of course, it is also one of the elements. Like when there is a muscular weakness, in that case you'll have more of you'll have proximal weakness. So for a beginner, I think this is enough for you. Like as and when we discuss neurology, you'll understand. So this is about. Then trunk muscles we said turning side to side. Now, usually what happens in stroke? Will the trunk muscles be involved?
Usually they're not involved, ma'am.
Yeah, very good. It is not. Why?
Because of the very little representation, ma'am, in the cortex.
No.
No.
Yeah. What? Now, corticospinal tract, what happens? Where does it arise? No, we have to go back to anatomy. Where does it arise?
Pyramidal
It arises.
cells
Yes, in the bed cells, pyramid cells, the motor cortex, premotor cortex, all that it arises. Then it comes to your subcortical region. Then it becomes very dense. Where it becomes very dense, all the fibers come.
Internal capsule.
internal capsule.
Internal. Yes, then it comes to the internal capsule, then it comes to the pons, then it comes to the midbrain pons, then it comes to the medulla. Then what happens at medulla?
Opposite.
Depreciation.
Decreasing.
Decussation. So usually around 75 to 80% goes as lateral corticospinal tract. It crosses over, but there are few fibers which go down as anterior corticospinal tract, right? So what they say is this: the muscles for that is your chest muscles and all, no, that all the trunk muscles as a the supply given by anterior corticospinal tract. So you have a bilateral representation. That is why trunk muscles never get involved in your stroke. So what happens is the patient will be able to turn side to side. But when there is a hemiplegia with a zero power, the patient may have difficulty. But per se, there is no weakness of trunk muscles. If the question is asked why there is no trunk involvement, you will have to answer like this: that there is even the supply by the anterior corticospinal tract. Okay, it has a bilateral representation. That is why the chest, the trunk muscles are not involved. Then we'll go to the cranial nerve history. So in cranial nerve history, we are going to ask about each cranial nerve. So what is so we'll start with the first cranial nerve. So what is the history you are going to ask about?
Smell disturbances.
One is smell disturbance. Then second cranial nerve.
Vision disturbances, ma'am. Loss of vision.
Loss of vision. Okay. Then your third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerve.
Diplopia.
Headache.
Diplopia. Yeah, very good. That is the history you are going to ask. Then fifth cranial nerve.
Loss of sensation of a face, ma'am.
One, of course, that you can ask. Then difficulty in chewing, all that you can ask. Then about the seventh cranial nerve.
His
Difficulty in closing eyes.
Very good. So difficulty in closing the eye. Then
mouth angle deviation. If they have noticed any
deviation
face
of
changes.
angle. Yeah. So that is about the seventh. Then eighth.
Any history of hard of hearing or any tinnitus.
Okay, good. So tinnitus, vertigo, hard of hearing, all that. 8, 9, and 10 together we'll ask. What do we ask?
If difficulty in speaking,
Difficulty in speech, okay. Dysarthria, okay. Difficulty in speech. Then
swallowing food, difficulty in
swallow.
swallowing food.
Then a third one will be regurgitation. When
Regurgitation.
patient is swallowing, patient can regurgitate the food. Okay. 11th cranial nerve.
Shrugging shoulders and turning head side to side.
Very good. Then 12th cranial nerve.
Using tongue to
Dysarthria, ma'am. Again.
Very good. One can be dysarthria. Second, difficulty. What else you can ask? 12th
using
cranial.
tongue to swallow.
Deviation of tongue.
Deviation of tongue. If they are very smart enough to tell you that's a history. Now we are still in the history. Of course, examination deviation becomes important, but still in history. Now, of all the cranial nerves, the most important thing is the 7th cranial nerve. Okay. Now, 7th cranial nerve, you can have two. You can have an UMN type of facial palsy, or you can have an LMN type of facial palsy. Now, before going to UMN and LMN, what is UMN and what is LMN? When do you call upper motor neuron?
Upper motor neuron would be the neurons that synapse before the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord.
So any when there is any the pathway from the what do you call the brain up to the when before they synapse up to the anterior horn cell. So any pathway above that is your upper motor neuron. Anterior horn cells, then your cranial nerves, then your neuromuscular junction and the muscle. That becomes your lower motor neuron. Above that is your upper motor neuron. Now we'll come to the 7th cranial nerve. So what is upper motor neuron for 7th cranial nerve and what is the lower motor neuron for the 7th cranial nerve? That is how you are going to understand this concept.
Frontopontine fibers.
Very good. So where is the root, the nerve, thing for 7th cranial nerve?
Lower pons, ma'am.
Nuclei is located in the pons. Yes. So it is located in so the frontopontine fibers is anywhere if there is a ischemia or whatever the damage, you call it as you will have an upper motor neuron type of facial palsy. Now, if it is at the level of nucleus and the next set of fibers, it is going to be a lower motor neuron facial palsy. How are we going to differentiate whether it is an upper motor neuron or a lower motor neuron?
Involvement of upper half of face, ma'am. Upper half of facial muscle.
What happens in which palsy the upper half of the face is involved?
Lower motor.
Lower motor, ma'am.
Very good. So this you should be. So when lower motor neuron involvement, the whole of the face will get involved. In upper motor neuron type of facial nerve palsy, the upper half of the face is spared. That is number one. Number two, suppose if it is an upper motor neuron facial palsy, where will be the lesion? Same side or opposite side?
Opposite side.
Opposite side. So a simple you remember is this the side of hemiplegia you will have the facial nerve involvement. Now deviation is to the same side or the opposite side, to the affected side or the healthy side.
Healthy side.
Healthy side, ma'am.
Healthy side, ma'am.
Okay, so that you should never make a mistake about that. Okay, so deviation of angle. Now again we go to the history. Difficulty in using right upper and lower limb for the past 4 days with the deviation of angle of mouth to the left side for the past 4 days. That is how your history will be there. That gives us a clue that patient is having right-sided hemiplegia with right-sided UMN facial palsy. Okay. Now UMN facial palsy, the upper half is not involved. Why is the upper half not involved?
Bilateral representation.
Because of the bilateral representation. So that is important. So in the history taking itself, you should, the cranial nerves, of all the cranial nerves, your 7th cranial nerve is very important. And all these such basic things, you should never make mistake when you are giving the history. Sometimes what will happen, they'll say that they'll not be able to give the history. But on examination, we find out that there is a deviation. So sometimes they may not tell us. So we can say some, sir, they didn't give us a history suggestive of facial nerve involvement, but on examination we found that there is a deviation to the opposite side. So that is how we go about. Now then we finished the cranial nerve history taking. Then we'll go next to the sensory. Now sensory, what are the questions you are going to ask?
If the patient is able to feel pain, temperature,
Yeah. So, is the patient able to feel the clothing on them? Is the patient
Clothing.
able to feel, yes, like that you ask, whether the patient is able to feel the pain, as you said. Then third you can ask is whether patient is able to feel the hot and cold when they take the coffee or tea tumbler or whatever it is. So that is how you're going to ask about the history of what do you call that, pain, touch and temperature, the basic questions you're going to ask. If it is so, which side, and on that you're going to ask. Now this becomes a very subjective question, which once you come. Now posterior column, what is the history specific for posterior column involvement?
Position and vibrations.
Yeah. So how will you ask the patient? What are the questions? History of posterior column involvement. What is the history taking you're going to take? Okay, what is wash basin sign?
While washing his face, it loses eyes, ma'am. So posterior column involvement. So it loses consciousness.
So the history, what you can not lose consciousness, doctor. No. Will not lose consciousness. So when the history of posterior column, whether the patient has swaying, one. Then whether patient is able to maneuver a narrow pathway. Then third is difficulty in walking in the dark. Fourth is this wash basin side. Now I'll come, why this concept. Now for our stance, or when we are standing or sitting, what are the three major systems involved? One is posterior column. Second is
Vision, eye, ma'am.
excellent. Then third is
Vestibular, ma'am.
vestibular.
Yeah.
So all these three together only, which is working in background. So when you're standing, sitting, you're closing your eye. So unconsciously, subconsciously, that goes on. Now, what is the action? How does posterior column help? That is your joint and position sense. No?
proprioception, ma'am.
Very good. So even when your eye closed, you know your limb position is in the flex position or extended position. So because of the posterior column, you're aware even if you close your eyes. Now next is your vision. Vision, it gives us a clue where we are seeing. And vestibular, by equilibrium, no, you know what is happening. Now suppose if the posterior column is damaged. Now one part is damaged. So only the other two output is, other two input is required for stance. So when we close the eye, that even the visual inputs have gone. That is why when they wash the face, the visual input is gone and they fall forward. That is called the wash basin sign. Am I clear? You understand what is the concept behind the wash basin sign?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yeah, so that is why you are going to ask. Then again, similarly, history of difficulty in walking in the dark. So when there is light in the daylight, no patient is having that visual input, so patient is able to walk. Now once it becomes dark, your visual input is going. So patient will have difficulty in walking. Then third is and the narrow pathway maneuver. All this is this concept. So that is the typical history of posterior column involvement. So sensory, when we are talking, we are going to talk about pain, touch, temperature, and we are also going to ask histories of the posterior column. And then next we'll go to cerebellum. So what is the history for cerebellar involvement? So cerebellum, we told it is the function of cerebellum is for coordination. So now suppose cerebellar involvement occurs, what sort of a tremor we are going to get? Come on,
Intentional. Intentional.
So you're going to get an intentional tremor. So what do you mean by the term intentional tremor?
While doing activities here, we'll get.
Yes. So patient, if the standing still, it's normal. But when the person reaches for the object, there'll be some movements. That is called as intentional tremor. So how do we ask in history is whether there is history of difficulty for reaching the object, in the sense that patient is having spillage. If they try to take coffee and all that, no, that can be done. Then again, history of swaying, cerebellar, that coordination, that so try falling to one side, that can be there. So ataxia, no, that is the thing. So history wise, you can ask about cerebellum. These are the history you can do. Then next we are going to go to the autonomic nervous system. So what is the history taking for autonomic nervous system?
Orthostatic hypotension.
Yeah, very good. So orthostatic hypotension, how are you going to ask by history?
Giddiness on waking up now or getting up from
So
bed.
when they suddenly get up from the bed, they say the giddiness has tendency to fall. Okay, one. What are the other things?
Sweating.
Palpitation.
Palpitation, all that. So which group of patients you are going to get an autonomic system involvement?
Diabetics.
Diabetes.
Since all the CVA, most of the CVA, there is a background history of diabetics, you may have such autonomic involvement. So that you should ask. And then next is bladder and bowel. So whether it is involved or not. Okay, now maybe at the end of your posting, we'll talk more about bladder and bowel. So basically, only in spinal shock, the bladder, they may not be able to sense bladder and they may have an automatic bladder. But once the spinal shock is over, usually the bladder, they are able to perceive the fullness and they can micturate. Only thing is, because of hemiplegia, they may not be able to go to the bathroom. Otherwise, the bladder will be 99% will not be affected in a CVA patient. Okay. Then bladder and bowel. Then next we come to the etiological history. Okay. So what are the etiological history you are going to ask? So what you are going to ask is whether there was history of recurrent chest pain, whether there was history of this anginal sort of chest pain, then whether there was history of severe headache, or you call it as thunderclap headache and projectile vomiting. What is this thunderclap headache?
Happens in subarachnoid hemorrhage.
Subarachnoid hemorrhage, ma'am.
Excellent. So for subarachnoid hemorrhage, there is sudden severe headache. They describe it as like thunder. How they hear. So if such a history is there, it is a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So and projectile vomiting. So if there is a severe headache with a projectile vomiting, what will you think of?
Increased intracranial tension. Cerebral edema.
Increased ICT, ma'am.
Good. So there is increased intracranial tension. So we should always give importance to such a history. It is one of the alarm signs. Now, see, headache is such a common complaint. All of us get headache. So, but there are few alarms we should activate. No, this is not the normal headache. This is something abnormal. So, one of the few is when there is headache associated with projectile vomiting, or if the headache makes you usually all the headaches, most of the headache, usually once you sleep, it disappears. So any headache which wakes you up is a very dangerous headache. Then headache, if there is associated with seizures. All these are few points which gives us that there is something very serious going on, relevant to headache. Okay, then headache is a vomiting, then a severe fever with neck stiffness. If there is a fever with neck stiffness, what does that indicate? Meningitis. So that you should ask. Then next is what else? History of dog bite. Why is dog bite important?
Rabies.
Okay, rabies present, of course, with the typical features of hydrophobia and all, or it can present as brainstem encephalitis. Okay, before that, once cranial nerves is over, you have to ask for the higher mental function. That is, whether there is a difficulty in speech, and what else you ask? Difficulty in speech, whether there is any illusion, hallucination, delusions, all that. That history will come in the higher mental functions. Okay, now last we are asking about the etiological history. These are the standard etiological questions we are going to ask everybody. But suppose if it is a young stroke, that is any stroke which occurs at below the age of 40, you call it as a young stroke. For young stroke, we have, as we already discussed, there are other causes like what are the causes?
Trauma.
Okay, very good. Trauma. Then any history of trauma you'll ask. Then
Hypercoagulable states.
very good. Hypercoagulable.
Factor V lead.
Yeah, that more common. Your mitral
OCP,
stenosis. Okay,
mitral.
OCP in female. Yeah, very good. Then your mitral stenosis, mitral regurgitation, all that. No
Collagen,
patient. What?
collagen vascular diseases.
Very good. So collagen vascular. So all that history. Now every patient you are not going to ask about all this history. But if it is a young stroke, you are going to ask such history. History of whether there is history of recurrent fever with joint pains, that is suggestive rheumatic heart disease, then history of palpitation, history of what else relevant to mitral stenosis, pedal edema, facial puffiness, dyspnea and all. Then history relevant for SLE in a young female, whether there is history of recurrent abortions. All that will be the history, etiological history relevant for that age group. Now, if it is an young stroke only, you are going to ask all this history. But whereas in your older age group, if there is a CVA, you needn't ask such histories. That is about the etiological history. So this will complete your history of present illness. Then we go to the past history. Now, in past history, what are the questions you are going to ask?
History of similar complaints in the past.
Very good. So one, whether it's a recurrent hemiplegia, history of similar complaints. Then next, what will you ask?
History of any monoocular loss of vision in one
What does that indicate?
transient ischemic attack.
History of transient ischemic attack or reversible ischemic neurological deficit. Now, what is transient ischemic attack? Can you define transient ischemic attack?
It's a focal neurological deficit that resolves within 24 hours.
Very good. So, a focal neurological deficit will resolve within 24 hours. Usually, it is only for 1 hour. Now, this deficit can be in the form of motor deficit, sensory deficit, or any other form. Like motor deficit, they may come with, like you're the junior resident in the emergency department or in your medicine wards. So, in OPD, or in your 24 hours duty, patient will come with weakness of left upper and lower limb. You admit the patient, within 1 hour patient becomes all right and he starts troubling you. That cannot be taken lightly. Now this is a TIA, that is, it is a transient ischemic attack. Now this is a patient, it is like another emergency. We don't want to, usually in a day or so they come up with a full-blown stroke. We don't want that to occur. So these are a group of patients which has to be managed aggressively. So one, it can be as a motor weakness or something, or it can be a sensory form. Typically, they'll say, I have a loss of sensation or an altered sensation of left upper and lower limb. You get a very typical history which recovers. So that also is a form of TIA. Now this is about this is about anterior circulation. If it is a posterior circulation, now before going to this complaint, I'll come about. So what are the blood supply of the brain?
Anterior, middle, and posterior cerebral arteries.
Yes, anterior cerebral artery, middle cerebral artery, and posterior cerebral artery. Now, where does your anterior and middle cerebral artery arise?
In the circle of Willis, ma'am, from internal carotid artery.
Okay, yeah. Then your posterior cerebral artery?
From the basilar artery, ma'am.
Okay, basilar, which is from the vertebral artery, right? So,
yes,
so that is how. So that posterior circulation is different and anterior circulation. Anterior cerebral artery and middle cerebral artery constitute your anterior circulation, and posterior cerebral artery in the posterior circulation. Now, ACA and MCA is going to supply all your frontal and the parietal area, right? Your posterior cerebral artery is going to supply all that occipit and the temporal. So, when it is a posterior column, posterior cerebral artery involvement, when there is any ischemia or embolic, that's also a very common thing. So, what are the type of complaints you are going to get? What are the 5 Ds?
Enuresis.
No. So you can have a dysphagia, dysarthria.
Okay.
Then what else, ma'am? Dizziness. That is, you can have. Then what? See, posterior circulation. You remember like this in all these forms: medulla, your cerebellum, your temporal, your occipital. all that is the supply of your posterior cerebral artery. That is posterior circulation. So you can have TIA in the form of giddiness also. You can have TIA in the form of dysarthria. You can have for difficulty. So it will be there for some time and then it recovers. So TIA is not, very, it can be varied manifestation. And what, as the doctor correctly said, that is transient loss of vision. What do you call that?
Amaurosis fugax, ma'am.
Yes, amaurosis fugax. So what happens? Where does the emboli go and lodge?
In central retinal artery, ma'am.
Ophthalmic artery, right? I think it is ophthalmic artery, and it is usually a transient loss of vision. Now, presence of this amaurosis fugax indicates that there is a big clot which is present in the internal carotid artery. Now, where usually the clots are common in the circulation that is relevant to your CVA?
Wherever
Femoral and popliteal, ma'am.
Where, ma? Yeah, ma?
Femoral and popliteal vein, ma'am.
I'm talking of CVA.
Carotid artery, ma'am.
Ma'am, middle cerebral artery.
Okay, I'll tell it in a better way. All that you have read, ma, but you are not telling it clearly. So when from common carotid, when there bifurcates to internal carotid, so at the point of bifurcation, why is it so?
Ma'am, because at bifurcation there's more chance of turbulence, ma'am.
So wherever there is turbulence, very good. So one at from common carotid to internal carotid, that's the area where there'll be the plaque formation, the atherosclerotic plaque formation is more. Second is, as she rightly said, when the NCA from this internal carotid, when it divides to NCA. So the middle cerebral artery. So these are the areas where the clot is at. Similarly, in this vertebral, then when it joins to form the basilar, then so when it bifurcates to this posterior cerebral. So all these points, the chances of the thrombus formation is more. So once the thrombus formation is there, when there is embolic shower from that, then you get all this TIA. Okay, that is the important. So history of TIA is more important, history of similar episodes, then history of reversible ischemic neurological deficit, that is RIND. What is reversible ischemic neurological deficit?
And that's a neurological deficit that lasts for longer than 24 hours but resolves within 24 to 96 hours, ma'am.
No, it resolves within 1 to 3 weeks. Okay.
1 to
Usually
3.
1 to 3 weeks. Okay, so it is more than 24 hours, but resolves within 1 to 3 weeks. That is reversible. So when you take a CT and all, CT scan film, it may not show obvious. In fact, usually the reperfusion occurs and usually patient recovers. That is one. That is another terminology which is used. Then next, what history you'll ask? What are the other past history you're going to ask?
Hypertension, diabetes.
So you're going to ask about all the risk factors, hypertension, diabetes, whether the patient is on any drugs for dyslipidemia, then any history of drug intake, your epilepsy, seizures, all that is you're going to ask. So at this point, tell me what are the modifiable risk factors for stroke?
Smoking.
Smoking, very good.
Hypertension, diabetes can be put under control.
Yeah, hypertension, diabetes, the obesity, dyslipidemia, all this, your what do you call atherosclerosis, what do you call that, accelerated atherosclerosis, all these are your risk factors. What are the non-modifiable risk factors for stroke?
Age, ma'am.
Age, one.
Gender.
Gender.
Genetic factors, ma'am.
Family history, genetic factors. So these three are the non-modifiable. But there are so many modifiable risk factors which we can identify and treat. Okay, so after past history, we are going to go to the personal history, where of course the smoking is important, alcohol is important, and of course whether they're taking, what is the importance of the mixed diet in CNS, not CVA, but other CNS.
Neurocystic sarcosis can occur in knowledge.
So all that, for that, the mixed diet is important. Okay, then we go to the personal history. Then next, what we go? Family history, whether of course it runs in the family or not, whatever. Usually it's not relevant in the typical case what you are presenting. Then, if it is a female, the menstrual history, no, short menstrual, what was the natal, no, antenatal. Suppose if it's a young female, so then we are going to talk in terms of this Aplar syndrome and recurrent abortion. No history of recurrent abortion, all that becomes important. Or if it is now a 55 or 60, postmenopausal, that history has to be brought about. Then I think we have completed the whole history, and then we are going to summarize whatever what we found. So summary. So till now we try to use the simple language, which is a full terms in which a patient will understand. But once we are coming to summary, we can start using the medical terms. So the history. So you can say 55-year-old male. Who's a known diabetic or a hypertension and a smoker, has come with a history of right-sided hemiparesis with right human facial palsy, with difficulty in speech for past 4 days, and it is static after the presentation. With this history, so with this presentation, we have to find out what is anatomical localization. So with this history of right upper and lower limb hemiparesis with right upper motor neuron facial palsy, where do you localize the lesion anatomically, history-wise?
Left, somewhere in the left.
Yes, left, where? Pyramidal tract, we spoke, it's such a big tract going on. Where will you localize?
Internal capsule. No?
Very good. Now my next question will be, why do you say it is internal capsule?
Because it's such a wide
distribution. We can use the term, it is a dense presentation. Both upper limb is involved, lower limb is involved, your seventh cranial nerve is involved. This is the only place in where all the fibers are coming together so closely. So that is, we call it as a dense presentation. So that is the place where you are hearing, you get such a pressure. So it is because of dense presentation, I think, in terms of internal capsule. So now that is your anatomical localization. What is the arterial territory involved?
Middle cerebral artery territory.
Very good. Which side?
Opposite, contralateral middle cerebral.
Contralateral. So now I said right hemiplegia, right hemiparesis. So it is a left middle cerebral arterial involvement. So what is the etiology you think of? So here we had a diabetes, hypertension, smoking. All this is etiology. What is the pathology?
Thrombus, embolism, or hemorrhage.
Okay, thrombotic. I will rather say thrombotic. I will not think hemorrhagic. Of course, you can have any presentation, but most common with this history of getting up from sleep, and once you get up from sleep, patient found difficulty a lot. It is your typical history of your thrombotic, or it can be thromboembolic also. Okay, so now this will beautifully summarize, and after your summary, you can tell the anatomical localization, what is the etiology, what do you think is the pathology, and what is the arterial involvement. In fact, if with a very good history taking, your 90% of your work is over. In fact, examination will just add on to whatever summary and whatever impression you got, it just add on. And almost your 90% gets over if you have a very good history taking and you analyze it well. Okay. Now we'll talk about one. Suppose if upper limb, lower limb, one side is involved, what do you call it?
Hemiplegia.
Hemiplegia. Plegia means complete involvement. Paresis means partial involvement. So it can be hemiplegia, hemiparesis. Suppose both lower limb involved, what do you call it? Only lower limb involved.
Paraplegia.
Yeah, it can be paraplegia or paraparesis. Okay. Then all the four limbs involved?
Quadriplegia.
Quadriplegia. Okay, so these are quadriplegia or quadriparesis. So these are few terms you should know. Now coming to hemiplegia, there are few more terminologies you should know. What is crossed hemiplegia?
Lesion would be on one side and the hemiplegia is on the contralateral side, no?
That is what always happens, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, one right upper.
Contralateral cranial nerve palsy.
Excellent. Now, we'll talk something about localization. I think with all this localization and this history taking, I think enough for today's class. Or you want to go for examination because it will take long time. Or shall we finish with general examination? One of you should tell me.
Till 10 o'clock we'll have, ma'am.
Okay, till 10 o'clock you are free and it's only 15 minutes now because I don't think we'll do justice if we do that examination. Also, we cannot finish within this 15 minutes. I think till general examination only we can continue this discussion. So remaining examination, if you want me to take, I can take only this Sunday because Sunday is the next slot for me. If it is okay for all of you, it is okay. Because I cannot go up to the full examination, cannot be completed within this 15 minutes. Okay. Okay, now I'll continue my class. Now, localization. Now, localization can be done after examination also. I'll give you a short gist of what can be done now itself. Now, as we already spoke, the lesion can be at the level of cerebral cortex, it can be at the level of corticospinal tract at the subcortical level, it can be at the level of internal capsule, or it can be at the level of your midbrain, pons, and medulla, and up to the upper spinal, just after it comes from the, what foramina it comes out, no? Pyramidal tract, the spinal cord. So
Foramen magnum. Foramen
yes,
magnum.
It up to the point where it reaches the anterior horns. So anywhere you're going to get only a pyramidal tract involvement. That is your CDA is basically pyramidal tract involvement. Now suppose if the lesion is in the cortex. When we talk about internal capsule, you're all very clear. It's a dense presentation. Both upper limb, lower limb at the same time involved. So you are very clear that it is your internal capsule. Now suppose at the level of cortex, what will be the presentation like?
Maybe a monoparesis. No?
Very good. So it can be a part of it involved, no? Because from there the fibers are widespread. So whatever lesion is going to be affecting only one part. So it may be only the speech involved, or it can be only a part, upper limb or lower limb, or one part will be involved. Then when you come to the subcortical region, the fibers are almost coming together, but still not so dense as an internal capsule. So you may have a hemiplegia or hemiparesis, but one limb may be involved more than the other. Then when you come to the internal capsule, you're going to get a typical dense presentation. Then when we come to the, brainstem, that is midbrain. From now on, what happens is, what are the cranial nerves which arises from the midbrain?
Third and fourth cranial.
Yes. So from here, what happens is, when there is a lesion in the midbrain, pons or medulla, all your cranial nerves start arising, third, fourth, then fifth and sixth is in your, pons, sixth and seventh, third, fourth, fifth will come in the midbrain, then pons, medulla is 9, 10 and 11 and 12. So here, from here on, what happens is, there will be ipsilateral lower motor neuron involvement with contralateral hemiplegia. That is what we call as crossed hemiplegia. Okay. To bring this only, I brought all this, I explained you in depth of all that. So now I think all of you should go and read up again to, to understand better what I told. I have taught you so many things in this history taking, but it will be very evanescent, and now it may be look very clear to you, but after one day itself you may start forgetting, unless you go up and read up in detail of what I have taught you. Now with this we'll go to the general examination. Only if you go and read up again, you go and take any textbook you want and read up, whatever I told you will be there. Only thing you'll be understanding better when now with this background of what I told you, if you read up, you'll understand better. Okay. Now we'll go to the general examination. So first is most important is whether the patient is conscious. So consciousness, whether the patient is conscious or patient is unconscious or patient is in altered sensorium. Okay. Then next thing you are going to see is patient is oriented to time, place and person. That you have to see whether patient is oriented or not oriented. Then whether patient has fever or not, afebrile. Okay. Then what do you see? You're going to see for your routine whether the patient is having pallor, patient is having jaundice. So the relevant because you want to general head to foot examination. Then next is you're going to see whether the patient is having generalized lymphadenopathy. Then you're going to see for the clubbing. Can anybody tell me the CNS causes of clubbing?
Paralyzed hand.
Okay, one, it can be a prolonged hemiplegia.
Signing of mild.
Very good. Excellent, Doctor. Dr. Aditya, I think I should really congratulate you for giving it. Of course, you may have, they may have taken classes for you, or it's very good that you know. Okay, so these two are the causes for hemiplegia. Okay, causes for, your clubbing, CNS causes of clubbing. Then, next is your generalized lymphadenopathy. Is there any bilateral pitting, pedal arrhythmia? Your standard questions for any general examination. Then relevant to CNS is your neurocutaneous markers. What are the neurocutaneous markers? We'll stop with this question. What are the neurocutaneous markers?
Capillate spot, neurofibroma,
Okay.
Ashleaf macules,
Shagreen patches.
port vein stains,
Yes, excellent. Then
Adenoma sebaceous.
adenoma sebaceum, good. Then what else? Why are we talking of neurocutaneous markers? What is the relevance of it? Why should you talk about neurocutaneous markers?
So we can see if there's any underlying neurological disorder, an entire syndrome.
Yeah. So this is a window sort of. No? If there is a problem in the skin, it shows that there is some neurological. Why is it so? What is the embryogenesis?
Ectodermal in origin.
Ectodermal.
Yeah. So both when embryology, when you see, both are ectodermal onset. So this gives a sort of a window. So one is like as you said, this adenoma sebaceum, all that is about. What is the disease where you get adenoma sebaceum, Shagreen?
tuberous sclerosis.
Sclerosis. Then if there is a port vein stain and all, what does it indicate?
Busch-Jacob syndrome.
Excellent. Then there is hematoma. Then the hemangioma. Then neurofibroma. Of course, you have this cafe-au-lait spot, your neurofibromas, all that. What is the disease caused if there is a neurofibroma? CNS involvement.
Neurofibromatous. Type 1.
What does it cause?
Von Recklinghausen disease.
Neurofibromatous type 1, type 2.
Type 1, type 2, yes. CNS involvement. CNS specific, what will it cause?
Acoustic neuromas.
Excellent.
Gliomas.
Excellent. And spinal cord, if there is a neurofibromas in spinal cord level, you can have paraplegias and all that presentation. Okay, that is so. Then these are okay. Then tuft of hair. Tuft of hair in the back. What does it indicate?
Spina bifida occulta.
Yes, spina bifida occulta. So these are few neurocutaneous markers. Now these are relevant always in the age group. Now we are talking about 60-year-old, 70-year-old, and all that. No. So what are the other neurocutaneous markers we are going to look for? Is your xanthomas, xanthelasmas, your arcus senilis. All these indicates what?
Atherosclerotic markers.
So signs of atherosclerosis, all that also forms your part of your neurocutaneous markers. So I think with this we will stop the class. I think you had an overdose of all your history taking of neurology. So next, I think when you are going to start presenting, only these are the set of questions we are going to get. So when you see a patient, is it true that all of you are coming by next week? We are going to have a physical class. Any idea?
We haven't received such info, ma'am.
No information as such.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I hope you all come to the wards as early as possible. So when you start taking, each patient, the history, with this background of what we should ask and how to analyze, I think it will become a bit easier for all of you. Okay. So I think the representative can give the attendance. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you, ma'am.